I don't really have any announcements or anything, so I'm just gonna jump right in. I only have this much on them, so they're gonna have to talk a lot. Loren and Shellie Marcus have been restoring wagons and building and repairing wood spoke wheels for over 25 years. Known as Marcus Wagon Works, they relocated their operation to Fallon in 2021. They have restored horse-drawn vehicles for several museums, including the Paso Robles how can I not even read? It's Pioneer, and I'm looking at this. P-O. Words are hard. Paso Robles, Pioneer Days Museum, the San Joaquin County Museum, fire departments, reenactment groups, and private collectors. They are also known as the owners of Holy Smoke. It has the wagon located in the room next door, but as you can see, we have relocated it for this evening. Please welcome Loren and Shellie Marcus.
Well, hi. That's a little loud.
They said we can't stand close together or we'll screech, so.
You don't have to be that far.
We're, like I say, we're wagon builders, we're wheelwrights, we're not very good public speakers. That's a little bit out of our wheelhouse, but we'll do the best we can. And like I said, we're originally from California. Trent moved here to Fallon in 21 and been loving it ever since. So we're glad to be here. I'll try to give you a little bit of background on ourselves and what we do and why we do it, and then we'll just open it up for questions as we go along. So if we're talking about something and you have a question, feel free to just go ahead and raise your hand and ask your question, and we'll deal with that as we go. So basically, as a child, I was raised on a 1,000-acre horse ranch in Sierra Valley, which was a fantastic place to be a kid. Then, like I say, when in the mid-'60s, my parents they split up, and we had the foundation went out from behind the horses. There were, the market kind of crashed, and you couldn't give away horses at that time. So my dad and my 3 brothers and we all went down to Culiacan, Mexico, and I spent about 8 years down there. And Dad was in ag and raising beef and pigs and quite a few different little things. But came back for my senior year in high school up here and went to my aunt's or my mom's side of the family. We have a ranch in Marysville. So went there, started working, pretty much never quit. But we got a pretty good foundation from working on the ranches and stuff. We learned how to be pretty self-sufficient, and instead of going out and buying things, we were kind of told to figure out how to build it or make it work, and either that or go get a job and get the money to do it. So things started coming pretty natural for us in a wide range. We got used to working wood and did a lot of leather work and stuff, and built saddles, and did welding and quite a few different things, worked different jobs, and eventually went to work for the Railroad Museum in Old Sacramento, and worked there for several years, did most of their wood restoration projects. They had some incredible people that could do anything with metal, so that was their forte, and I was pretty good with the wood. So we did some pretty interesting projects there, and when it slowed down, we moved back to the family ranch. Well, we still lived on the ranch, but we moved our shops to the family ranch and just started working on wagons again, and been basically working on them ever since. We don't advertise. We just started working on them for fun, and then all of a sudden we're getting people wanting things fixed and wheels fixed and so forth. So we had to teach ourselves as we went along how to do this work, because there's no schools around here to do it with. And eventually started getting more busy with the wagons than we were with the jobs. So that's what we stuck to. And I'll let Shellie say a little bit about her background and how we met, and a little bit about Holy Smoke, and we'll go from there.
Well, my background's a lot different. I'm the suburbs of Los Angeles. Born and raised. My brother and I were the only 2 in 4-H in the whole high school, and there was a 1,700 kid graduating class my senior year. But I always loved animals and loved the Old West. So I was just totally different. I was the only girl in Azusa that had 300 rabbits in my backyard, because that was my 4-H project. And went on to college at Mount Sac, which was an agriculture junior college, and then on to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. But my parents, after my father retired, bought vineyards up in Sonoma County, California. So I eventually motated up to Sonoma County, California, and that's where I met my second husband, who was into wagons and horses, and learned to drive. I've been driving about 40 years now. I used to be able to handle 6. I probably can't even handle 4 now, but I'm damn good with 2. I can drive a team and drive single, and we participate in the Fallon Horsemen's Association. Jim Cann is here. In fact, Loren's got a belt buckle. We drive our horses through the Jim Canna classes, through the barrel racing, the pole bending, and all that. So we do it with a cart instead of riding our horses. And so from there, I had quite an extensive wagon collection, of which Holy Smoke became part of in the early 1990s. I found it at an auction in Turlock, California. It's actually got a chuck box in the back. And we have it out with our barbecue area, and we cook out of this all summer long. So we use Holy Smoke, as well as the fact it's probably been on about 40 wagon trains throughout California, Oregon, and Washington with me. It's done the Reno Rodeo cattle drive many times, pulled with both mules and horses. We did the sesquicentennial wagon train in California, where 7 wagon trains all came together at the Port of Stockton for a big celebration. We had over 150 wagons there at the Port of Stockton at one time, and she was there. My son was 18 at the time and drove it for the last time. For me. Now he's got his own wagons and his own draft horses, so he does his own thing with them. But from going back to Holy Smoke was at an auction, and I was looking it over, and I said to my ex-husband now, at the time, I'd really like to have this. And he goes, what are you going to do with it? And I said, well, we'll just add it to the collection. Maybe we'll start doing some wagon trains. Well, I met the man who was selling it, and he was very upset he was having to sell it. He was a minister out of Copperopolis. His name was John Betancourt, and he took kids camping during the summer in this wagon, and took them out, and they learned all about nature and camping. And Holy Smoke, in the back of one of the boxes in the chuck wagons, was full of cowboy Bibles. And so she came to me with probably about 50 cowboy Bibles, which over the years I've handed out to friends. But one of his mules got sick, and in order to pay the vet bill, which at that time was about $3,000, he sold the teammate to it, and then the first mule died. So the minister of the church said, you know, we need to recoup some of these funds because we bought the team, the harness, the wagon, and now we don't have anything to pull it. So they brought Holy Smoke to the auction. And we were successful in bidding on it. I don't even remember now what we paid for it. Wagons were pretty high at that time. But about 6 years later, on the sesquicentennial wagon train, there was a group up singing one night for us for entertainment. And the guy got up to the microphone, and he started talking about Holy Smoke. And he says, I used to have this wagon named Holy Smoke. And he started telling his story, and I stood up and I went, she's right out back here. And he says, you're kidding. I go, no, she's been on the whole wagon train for the last 9 days. So I got to meet up with him again, and he got to see Holy Smoke again. So I was divorced in 1999. I got part of our wagon collection as part of my settlement, which included 5 authentic stagecoaches. And I kept Holy Smoke and about 6 other vehicles, but I sold the rest at Martin's out of Pennsylvania. Came out and auctioned off my collection in Sonoma County. I did bring a book back here with pictures of all my vehicles. We've got several books back there of vehicles that we've also restored. We've actually done 25 vehicles for Paso Robles Museum over the years. So that's my story, an LA girl who loves the Old West. I always told everybody I was born 100 years too late. And my mother said that she could understand why I couldn't collect thimbles like a normal girl instead of stagecoaches. But I'd rather have a stage. Actually, I have a thimble collection too. She started that for me. So.
Okay, well, we can go several different directions with this. We can get into a lot of details on how the wheels are built and stuff, or the different uses for these wagons. A lot of people.
Oh wait, can I gotta tell you how I met Loren. I had some wheels on a wagon that were loose and they need to be repaired, and the old man up in Fiddletown who built this wagon, Ron Schofield, who restored it, wasn't doing it anymore, and he said, well, I heard of a guy in Marysville named Loren Marcus. You ought to look him up. And a couple of my girlfriends said, oh, I heard about him. He's single. He's really nice. He's the kind of guy. And I went, you know what? After 2 marriages, the last thing I want is another man in my life. So I went out to Marysville, to his ranch, with my wagon wheels, and he fixed them all up for me. And as we were talking, I said, you don't happen to have a use for a nice industrial sewing machine, do you? I've got one in my garage now. I've had for 11 years, and I've never sewn on it. And it's really good. It came from a saddle maker out in Sonoma, California. And he says, yeah, I could use that. I'll take it in trade. I really got to missing that machine, so I married him. So I got my machine back, and he's never sewed on it. I make a lot of wagon canvases with it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Huh?
How did Holy Smoke get its name?
Oh, from the campfires.
Yeah.
They took it out of
Okay, so when it
campfires.
was
Between the campfires and the Bibles and,
And the
you know,
Bibles, yeah, Holy
the teaching
Smoke,
the kids.
yeah.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, that emblem on the side of the Holy Smokes is the original one that Schofield painted. He was quite an artist also. So quite a few years back, we went through and touched up Holy Smoke, but you can tell there's a little bit of a different color around that emblem there. We B-72 did and protected it, but we didn't paint over it or try to retouch it up. So Holy Smoke, when it goes home, it's going back into the shop. It's due for another facelift, and it's had a lot of miles on it. So we're gonna redo the wheels and the bed and everything and the stuff, but that will still stay protected. We won't mess with that at all.
Loren, do you mind if I interrupt for a second here?
Go for it.
So he just said he B-72 over that Holy Smoke logo.
Yeah.
B-72 we use in museums also. It's, in layman's terms, it's a kind of a lacquer that it doesn't yellow, it doesn't crack, it's museum quality.
And
So
the big thing about it too is it's reversible.
Yeah, it's reversible, yeah.
Yeah.
So the stuff
If you change your mind down the road, museums usually don't want to do any changes permanent to something like this. We've used it on several different pieces. We did for the Paso Robles Museum, we did 3 big freight wagons that belonged to one family, and they hauled grain down in the Paso Robles country. And they were all painted a god-awful green color, and they were all falling apart. So they had us, actually we did all 3 of them in one year. But we started on, as luck would have it, we started on the one wagon, and they didn't know what make these were or anything. They did know the family history and stuff on them. But we went down through probably 5 layers of paint, and below on the back axle down underneath it, and that's why it was protected, we found the original Studebaker Brothers handwritten logo on the back axle under 5 layers of paint, and the complete pinstriping pattern for the wagon. And it turns out they weren't green, they were blue.
Yeah,
Blue and yellow.
bright blue color. There's pictures of them in one of the albums back there.
So, but like I say, same thing, that once we had it exposed, we B-72'd that, and that's the way it stays. It's protected, but it's original. So those kind of surprises are part of why it's fun to work on wagons. So you don't expect to see those too much. But so basically, most people a lot of their exposure on wagons and types and so forth, they see in the movies or in Hollywood and this and that. And with Hollywood, most of the time you got stagecoaches, you got buckboards, you got doctor buggies, and you got grain wagons. There's not too much else that they like to run through their scenes. But there was just a whole world of wagons out there. I mean, if you can think of what's going down the highway nowadays, cars, trucks, pickups, belly dumps, end dumps, all kinds of construction equipment. There was pretty much a wagon that was doing that job before the trucks came along. We got lucky enough to bring down 28 loads of wagons off the old Ponderosa Ranch, the old Bonanza series. And most of these things had sat out on the mountain for 40 years in the snow, so they were in real rough shape. Most of them had just imploded, but we brought all of them back. Some of them are really good historical pieces that we're lucky enough to be able to save. Some of them even are local history from here in the Comstock Lode and some of those things. Some helped put the railroad up over the summit. And we've gotten a lot of them restored, a lot of them left to do. But
we can't die till we're 112. We've got that many wagons.
But there were wagons that, the kind of obvious, this type of wagon is what we usually call a grain box wagon. A chuck wagon is really nothing more than a grain box wagon with a chuck box in the back. They were designed for the cattle drives and ranch work, but it was, like I say, there was no set style or pattern or anything else. It was whatever that ranch had and who put the box together and what the cook wanted, how they designed them. The freight wagons were basically the same. Actually, these were even used for freighting, but most of the time they were longer, 16-foot beds or bigger, heavier. Most of the people that came across the country in wagons used either grain box wagons like this because they wanted to keep them and use them for farming work once they got there. Most of them were a little bit bigger than this, and a lot of them, there's a general term called a prairie schooner, which referred to pretty much any of these wagons that just came across the prairies. So they, Hollywood would kind of, if you ever watch Wagon Train or some of those old shows, you might see them in camp, and all of a sudden they walk in the back and there's some lady that's sick in bed, and she's in a queen-size bed, and 7 people in there, and there's dressers and mirrors and everything else, and they all fit in that wagon. Well, if you ever looked at the back of Holy Smoke, there's not a lot of room, and everything they owned was in that wagon. So there really, most of the time, wasn't even any room to ride in it. You walked alongside of them, and it wasn't an easy journey. But yeah, there wasn't very many queen-size beds coming across the plains at that time. The construction-wise, they had scrapers. They even had excavators that would be pulled by horses and shoot the wagon, the dirt up into the belly dump wagons to move them. We've brought back quite a few implements and scrapers and different things, and luckily, like I say, these were all fairly unusual pieces that we're either put together and using ourselves. We farm with our own horses out here off the Soda Lake Road, we play with them, we do the wagon trains, we do everything like that. But one of the things we learned early on, building wheels and putting wagons together and repairing them and stuff, is that if you're gonna do this kind of work, you pretty well have to be a teamster also. Because you can't understand how everything works unless you've actually used them and you know the ins and outs, what works and what doesn't work. And that helps keep you alive too. But as far as, like say, the different types of wagons also require different types of wheels. So you know, just a quick evolution on the wheels. The very early on ones were basically just a slice cut out of a big log. And the end grain went this way to them. In other words, it was like this. So it was just basically a log sliced off, rounded a little bit, and hole drilled in it. And it was mounted on a wooden axle. And they didn't last very long just due to the nature of the wood itself. The next step, what they did is they tried a different tactic. Still was a solid wooden wheel, but they cut planks out that usually were about 8 inches thick and layered them up and attached them together with heavy wooden dowels. And these lasted a little bit longer. They just basically cut the circle out and they mounted them up, and they got to where they were building wooden hubs on both sides for a little bit more stability. But there again, they didn't last very long and they were very hard to pull. And most of these were on what they call ox carts or donkey carts. And they were just, they were so heavy you couldn't carry a lot of load in them. But they were one step forward. Then they come up with the idea of doing a spoke and a felly wheel, and that got rid of a lot of the weight, and it actually made a stronger wheel. They still had the problem of, the hitting the rocks and everything with the wood, it chews them up and they would break and so forth. So then they came up with the idea of taking, and I don't have one here with me, but they did what they called strakes. They were short pieces of metal that were bent to the size of the wheel, and they were nailed on to the fellies. And they did this all the way around the wheel, and that worked pretty good. The only thing is that they would tend to come loose and fall off, and they had to continually fight with them. And the wheel still had a strength problem. So then they came to this point where they have a solid metal band to go around the wheel. And it didn't take them very long to figure out that instead of wedging them tight, if they measured them, and like I say, this is what's called a felly. If they measured the outside of this felly and then measured the inside of the tire, and they made the tire anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch smaller than what the wheel was, then they could stick this into a fire, get it hot, and make it expand. And then they lay it over the wheel and cool it down with water real quick. And when it contracts, everything tightens up in this wheel, and it makes a very strong wheel. And it lasts a long time. A lot of these wheels that we work on are well over 100 years old and still going strong. These wheels are probably, I'd say the hubs are probably original. The spokes have been replaced. Fellies probably have been replaced too. But I would say the running gear on Holy Smoke is probably no later than 1910 at the most. And it's been taken care of. But that pretty much gives you an evolution on how the wheel got to this stage. And that hasn't really changed in over 200 years. I mean, we're still building them the same way now as they did back then. 1700s, they were doing a lot of this technology by then. And by the 1800s, or 1860s, 1870s, they started doing a lot of other experimentations as far as, this is the same type of hub that Holy Smoke has. It just gives you an idea of how it was mounted on the axle and everything was put together. This is actually what's on the inside of this hub. Okay, this is the spine that's mounted on the axle. This is the boxing that goes on the inside. So they went from wood on wood to developing a cast iron boxing that would go on the inside of the hub. And that would run on a metal spindle that they were finally able to grease. They couldn't really grease the wood on wood because there was no way to keep the dirt out. And if they greased them, all that dirt stuck to them, and it was just like sandpaper. I mean, it just wear it out in no time at all. With this system, they shape everything here a little bit better. They've got these lips and stuff, and they all work together to help keep the dirt out away from inside the boxing. And they even, on some farm wagons, they'll just take like an old rubber tire or something and lay it over the top here, and that helps just keep some of the dirt out. So you can go for, you know, maybe 20 miles or better just on one greasing on these things. The next thing that they did is they came to, they wanted to one up on that. You know, if you think of wagon people back in the 1800s in that era, they weren't really any different than your automakers nowadays. They've all got to come up with something better. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Some of them, there were some pretty silly ideas out there. But this was one of the very popular ones. To get away from that, they went to a wooden hub, or core as we call it. They were mortised, but then they went to these caps. And this is what they call a Sarvin hub. And your spokes fit into these mortises, and then this is bolted all down tight, and it snugs everything up. And it made a more durable wheel yet. You don't get the cracks like, if you look at, well, if you've been down here to look at them, you can see some hub caps on here, which is just natural. These bands are what counteract that, so it doesn't split. The Sarvin hub pretty well did away with that problem. And it was used on everything from light carts or light wagons up to heavy hitch wagons and you know, like beer delivery wagons and freight wagons. The next step was what they called a roller bearing wheel. And this is what the hub looks like. It's an all metal hub. There's no wood in it. And it's one of the most modern ones. It actually takes a roller bearing like a trailer would do on an axle. And your spokes fit into these mortises, then it clamps down the same way. It bolts down tight, and that's why they call them a bolted hub or a roller bearing hub. And that's pretty much the most modern setup that they've got. And it's worked forever, and you can go all the way up to same thing again, 2-inch axles and you know, heavy freight wagons, etc. As far as putting a wheel together, you've got a different type of spokes. You've got everything from, these are all wooden hub spokes like Holy Smoke's got, but you can go everything from a very light spoke like this all the way up to spokes of that size or even bigger.
What are they made out of, Loren?
These are all made, well, up to 2 inches are usually all made out of hickory on the wood. And the reason they use hickory is that oak and ash are a little bit, they're very strong, but they're a little bit too brittle. And hickory has hickory has a lot of strength, but it's also flexible. And what they also do is they do what they call a neck on these things. In other words, this is the tenon that fits inside the hub. These all butt up all the way around, just like this is a bolted hub, but they depends on how big the hub itself is. These will either be touching or they'll have, you know, whatever space amounts to. But they choke it down right here. Just as it's coming out, it's actually thinned down just a little bit. And this one's a little more exaggerated, that's why you can see it. And the reason for this is that if you hit a rock with this wheel, it'll flex right there. And if it didn't have that, it would probably break. It would tend to break. But this gives it just enough flexibility to take the jar out and preserve your wheel. They also, during the same time, used to, especially on farm implements, although they did make some wagon gears that were all metal. And the argument going on there was, which was better, the solid metal wheel, which sounds like it ought to be way better than a wooden wheel. But the wooden wheel actually proved to be stronger yet because of this feature here. You hit a rock with a metal wheel, something bends. There's no flexibility to it. And so this is why this system has pretty much not changed in a few hundred years. The spoke on itself, these are a couple of spokes we just got done doing 22 heavy freight wheels for a guy out of Paradise, California. And these were some of the ones we took from his setup. And you can see how they're not very straight. Over time, with the tire being, putting the pressure on the wheel and stuff, being wood, it'll start giving to the pressure, but this is over quite a few, decades, really. But we replace them because if they're not straight, then you're going to have what they call a drunk wheel. But this shows you, this is the tenon on this type of wheel that goes in. And if you see on this side, this is straight, this is not, okay? There's an angle put into this tenon that's deliberate. There's a mortise in the wheel that has the exact same angle built into it. So on a wheel, you put a 2-degree angle on the front, and on the spoke, you put a 2-degree angle on the back. And what that does is instead of this spoke coming out of the wheel straight, it's coming out at a 2-degree angle. And that's what they call a dish in wheel. And the reason for that is that if this wheel was just straight up and down, and you drove it off a curve or you drove it around the side of a hill or something, that sideways pressure would just cause these tenons to break and this wheel would come off. Basically, just disintegrate. Best way is if you have a sheet of paper and you just hold it by the end, it's just going to go like that. But if you fold it up a little bit and you get that curve to it, it'll stick straight out. It's got strength from it. That's kind of the same theory that these wheels have. So most wagon wheels are built on a 2-degree dish. And that's where they get their sideways pressure strength. If you're doing cannons, they get beat up a little bit more. So their dish, it gets increased up to a 6-degree angle, which is a little bit further out here. And if you look at a wheel let me put this over here. Good, it didn't fall over. If you look at a wheel, these are getting, like I say, we need to rework Holy Smoke a little bit. The wheels that are aimed at the ground should be exactly straight up and down. That's what they call a plumb spoke. The wheels on the top angle out a little bit from here. So to get that plumb spoke, your axle, the spindle on the axle acts to have that same 2-degree angle bent down. And that makes everything line up the way it should be, and it tracks well. Some European vehicles, they would exaggerate the dish considerably for the reason of being plumb spoked. This, instead of being here, if they gave it an exaggerated angle, the top of the wheel would be out here some way, depending on how much dish they gave it. But what that did for them, especially hauling hay and stuff, is it widened the area that they could put a load on. So they could design the wagon, instead of being here, they could actually angle them out too. And they could get more on the wagon at one time. It didn't make for a stronger wheel, but it worked for that purpose. As far as the fellies goes, which is this outer rim, they used to most of the earlier ones that were what we call a sawn felly, and they were basically just cut out of a flat piece of wood, and they span 2 spokes. So there'd be a section here, and so forth around. So a back wheel that has 14 spokes would have 7 sawn fellies. Then they started getting good at bending wood and learning how to make it work, because the fellies were a little bit trickier than some of your furniture making. You know, a lot of people have bent wood or stained wood and bent wood on a mold. That doesn't work for a felly, because there's such a compression that goes on with them. They actually came up with machinery that would do the work, and the fellies have to be cut longer than what they're going to be. And a bent felly is 2 pieces. It's half and half. And so there's a joint here, there's a joint down here. And what they found is if they just tried to bend it around a mold, they would actually get crimping, and it wouldn't stay true. So there was a way of bending them that actually put pressure in all the right spots and allowed this to bend. And then, like I say, when we order a felly, it looks like this. This is a bent felly that was made by the Amish back east, and they have the machinery to still do it. What you gotta watch out for, and even the Amish cheat a little bit, they try to save on material, so they don't continue this curve far enough. They cut it off too short. So if you order I think this is what, a 46-inch wheel, the circle doesn't come out to be true, because your 46, when it measures out, it might be way out here. Well, this is flat. It's no longer on the curve. And that creates a problem, because when your joints come together, they aren't just smooth like this, they tend to come in like that. And that's something you gotta fix, repair. It might take months to send it back and tell them to send me a better one. So those are issues that you deal with. Most of your lightweight ones are beveled. The heavier they get, the more straight-sided they are. The reason they bevel these is that you can go to a bigger spoke, because your spoke should not be bigger than your felly. So you can go to a bigger spoke and still keep a smaller tire. And the reason you might want a smaller tire is it all depends on the terrain that you're going to be working in. In other words, holy smoke, just by looking at her tires, you would basically say that it came from a mountainous country or a rocky country, hard dirt country. That's why you've got the narrow tires, because you're easier to work your way through the rocks and the road and so forth. Out here, you would basically see a lot more 3 to 4 inch wide tires, because you're in soft sandy country. And these will dig in and be harder to pull. So the size of the tire and the size of the wheel corresponds to what you're doing with that wagon and what kind of a load it's pulling. And like I say, if most of these tires or these wheels come with, this one's got them, but we don't use them. They come with holes drilled in through the tire, and at the joints, there's going to be 2 holes, and they put a little plate on here, and that holds the joints from moving it back and forth. And then usually what we do is every other spoke, we put what they call a tire bolt in. It's a special made bolt to hold the tires on. They really serve no purpose at all, except for if you let your wheels get loose, it might get you home. But they don't really have a good function. They actually have more trouble than they're good, because they allow water into the wheel, and that's usually where they rot, is where your tire bolts go and your joints go and things like that. So most of the time on our own wheels, we don't put them back in, because we have the ability to tighten our wheels whenever we see them getting loose. Not that Holy Smoke's a good example of that, because she's already overdue. But when we do wheels for customers, we almost always put the bolts in, just because it might be quite a while before they were back. Yes, sir.
So Lauren, you talked about you got wider tires for down here, so
Yep.
if it's sandy, whatnot. Thinner tires if it's rocky. I think thinner tires would be great if you had real roads too.
Yep.
So the folks coming over on the Overland Trail, they're gonna have to
Usually they were wider.
all sorts of different kinds of terrain. What sort of did they do?
Most of the time, those were heavy. Those were wider tires. Yeah, you didn't. This type of wheel, they also they call them a cookie cutter. You know, just because they come from a wide hub down to a fairly narrow wheel, and some of them are even more narrow than that. But if you're going to go across country like that, you're better off. I'm just hoping that table won't flip. You're way better off having a wide tire and fighting the rocks than having a skinny tire and getting stuck. You know, because you're going to go through all kinds of country. So yeah, most of those that came out were that. Another sideline on these wagons that were coming across the country, a lot of freight companies hauled wagons out. And it would take, 6 months or better sometimes to get, whatever you ordered from back east for it to get here on a freight wagon. And they would basically it'd start out with big heavy wagons, and they learned to adapt to what was on, say that they were coming to California or here to Nevada. When they got here, people didn't need big freight wagons. So basically what they were doing is they were getting here, and then they'd take the wagons out of town and they'd set fire to them, and then they'd bring the metal into the blacksmith guy who would buy it, because there was an extreme shortage of metal to work with on this end. So they, they wouldn't take the wagons 6 months back to get another load. They were one-way trips. And they learned real quick that sometimes it paid off more to use this type of wagon instead of the big freight wagons, because when they got here, they could sell them to the farmers that were here and make money. And then, like I say, they would just go back with their animals, or they'd get rid of most of their animals and go back and just resupply and restock and make another run. So a lot of wagons, just like I said, that's all they saw was one trip. But some of them were pretty worn out by the time they got there too. So that's something you also see a lot in Hollywood in the movies. They're almost all old weathered wagons that you see going across these wagon trains and stuff like that. Pretty much all of them were brand new when they started. So they were in a lot better shape than what Hollywood is showing. But this is a rough trip, So.
Well, the thing with Holy Smoke is the box comes off.
Right.
This box lifts right up. So farmers had other boxes they could set on for different purposes. They had like a going to town box, or they would have a box that hauled livestock. So they would just hoist the body up and then move the running gear out from underneath it and slide it over and drop another box on top of it for another purpose.
This running gear basically has what we call a bolster, one over each axle, and these standards are the only thing that keep the wagon box in place. They're not attached, they're not bolted down or anything. So like I said, like Shellie is saying, is most of these farmers couldn't afford 3 or 4 wagons. So they could buy one running gear and 3 or 4 different bodies. It depends on what they were doing, whether they were haying or hauling grain or whatever. And they were made it easy to swap out, and it was something they could afford that way. So,
You didn't do your rubber tire.
yeah, okay. So back east, the steel tire was pretty much the thing for a long time. But then some of these cities back east started cobblestoning their streets. And if you've ever drove down a cobblestone street, it's pretty doggone rough. And it would really beat the heck out of these tires and the people and the wagons and everything else. So the people that could afford it started putting, actually most of the finer coaches and stuff had 2 sets of wheels. They would use the steel wheels or tires to travel, because those were usually dirt roads. And for in town, they had a second set of wheels. This one doesn't have all the spokes and stuff, but it's got a rubber tire built onto it. Okay, and this gave them cushioning and it quieted it down quite a bit running over. Nowadays they like them because they're driving on asphalt and stuff, and it makes it quieter. It doesn't really give you a lot of cushion, not like a pneumatic tire will do, but it does help some. And those are basically, instead of the flat steel, we put a rubber channel or a steel channel on the wheel, and it depends on the size of the felly. Like I say, they make rubber that fits into this channel, and it can go all the way up to 2.5 inch wide. I mean, it's very expensive. But what it is there's a hole, there's 2 holes that run lengthwise through this rubber. And we put, it's high tensile wire. It's a special wire that we feed it through. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you put the 2 wires through, and I have a machine that when you mount this up on the machine, it grabs the wires and it pulls them really tight. And when we mount the wheel, or the rubber on the wheel, the rule of thumb is that we overlap. In other words, there's half the distance between the spokes of extra rubber. In other words, make it longer than what the wheel is. And the machine will suck these wires down and compress that rubber back, and it leaves a gap about yay big. When it clamps everything down, it gives me a chance to cut these wires off with about a 5/8 to a 3/4 inch overlap, and we solder them together. Then when you pull this out of that machine and you spin and drop it on concrete, and that G-force forces this rubber to go up until it closes like that one over there. Sometimes, again, rubber tires are not my favorite thing. It's easier said than done. But that's how they go on. And without that machine, you pretty much aren't going to get them on. We know quite a few people that have tried, and they end up bringing them to the machines. So, yes, sir.
So these machines you talk about, are these the same ones they had way back when?
Yeah.
Or are these modern inventions?
Well, mine is a newer machine I bought from the Amish, but it's the pattern is the same one that they used 150 years ago. It hasn't changed. It's just, like I say, they started making new ones to sell to whoever's working with rubber tires.
So 150 years ago, did they have lathes to do all
They
that
did.
stuff?
It was some. I've got a book about that thick, and it's nothing but basically wheel making machinery that came about in the 1800s during the Industrial Revolution. And basically, Europe, was several years or 100 years ahead of us. But with the Industrial Revolution, the American ingenuity kicked in, and we said that, instead of making spokes out of, by hand, that's where these spoke shapes and all these other terms came from, draw knives, let's make a machine that does that. So they made a duplicating lathe back then that they basically put the spoke size and pattern on this thing, and this machine just started spitting out spokes. And that's why we buy our spokes. I've made my own spokes, it's not worth it. We buy our spokes from the Amish back in Pennsylvania. I can buy a spoke for $5 to $8 or $10, where it'd be a $40 to $50 spoke if I had to make it by hand. The same thing with the fellies. They have the machines that will bend those fellies. I mean, these are all huge machines, but they still have them back there. A lot of this stuff disappeared during the war for metal. A lot of this, got melted down, but the Amish still have them. and that's where we get our supplies from. Yes, sir.
What's the rough timeline for your different style of hubs? Wood on wood to the cast iron to the steel?
Well, the wood on wood, basically like your ox carts, the solid wood wheels. Back in the mission days, that's pretty much what they used back then. Back in the Roman days, they had already gone to a spoke type of wheel they used on their chariots and stuff. And I don't have the exact dates on them. I love history, but I'm not really a historian. But the wheel, has been around for centuries. And realistically, the evolution of the wheel, the early ones went fairly quick. I mean, they got up to the spoke wheels in a fairly short period of time. And it's kind of like everything else. Some areas got really quick, changed. Some areas, like your missions, were real slow to change. But I would say it's probably one of the things that has changed the least in probably 400 years, than most anything else you're going to run into. I mean, they got it right. I mean, and it still works. So, do you think of anything else that we can throw at them?
No. The one thing is these hubs are a solid piece. And they used to go out and cut trees and cut hunts, and they would leave them for 10 years out in the fields, and then go and collect them because it took that long for the wood to dry out so they could use it.
If you think what they used to do years ago, I mean, before the machinery and stuff, I mean, it was impressive how dedicated and how good these people were. Like I say, they knew how to go out in the forest and spot a tree and say, well, that one's going to make hubs and this one's going to work for fellies and so forth. It's like Joe said, they would cut them down and they would lay on the side of the road for probably 3 years. And then they would come in and cut them into lengths a little bigger than what they wanted for it. And they would bury them in sawdust for probably at least another 4 years, before they ever even started working on it. So I mean, it's, you don't get that wood nowadays. Yes, sir.
So with the size of the machinery, not really transportable, and you got to wait 3 or 4 years. It's not something you're going to find on the side of the road. So what would a journey from, like Overland Park or something to out here, it's 1,500 miles, would they take an experienced person with them, or would everybody, like if you're in a wagon train, would they have a dedicated person, or was everybody sort of knowledgeable and could make most
of those people that were coming across had quite a bit of abilities already. There was a little bit of everything there, but I mean, I haven't really seen where they put out ads that we want a wheelwright to go along with us and this and that. But usually, take for an example right now, I mean, there's probably 20 people in here that know how to change a tire, change those, I'm dating myself, change spark plugs and things like that. How to do basic work on their cars. These people back then knew how to do most of the maintenance and so forth. They'd probably gone through breaking spokes and things like that and gone in and have at least watched how they fixed it. There usually was some kind of a blacksmith along because most, that was one of the main trades of the time. The other thing that I didn't mention, I don't have one with me. There is one more type of hub here, and it's called an Archibald hub, and it's also an all-metal hub. And the military used them quite a bit, and they were using some heavy freight type wagons also. But the reason they liked the Archibald for the campaigns, it had this kind of a spoke in it. And the inside that hub was just a cylinder, and it didn't have the tenons like the little Bolton hubs did. So these all fit in just side by side all the way around. And the reason the military liked this was it was very easy to replace these out in the field. Where if you were trying to, if you broke one of these hubs or tore something up in here, you've got to have all the right equipment to be able to put that thing back together again. And the Archibalds were something that you could use very few tools on and just get it done in a day and keep on going. So.
And most wheels aren't interchangeable.
No.
Because of the skines and the boxing sizes, you just can't take a wheel off of one wagon and put it on another one. It won't fit.
So they wouldn't be able to take spares?
No.
Well, back then, like I say, when you've got to take into consideration that there were thousands of small shops building wagons and building wheels and different things, plus the huge companies that were, Weber's and all these different ones. But everybody had their own style, their own size, and some of it was deliberate. They didn't want you going to a competitor to buy a wheel for a Weber wagon, say. So everything is little, especially with this type, with these skines. You've got several factors. You've got length to deal with. You've got diameter at this side of the cone, diameter at this side of the cone, inside diameters. And I had a pile of skines and stuff and boxings at the ranch in Marysville that was, I don't know, I had a few hundred of those things there. And I had a customer come in with a set of wheels that they wanted for a wagon. Somebody had taken their wheels off their wagon. And I went through well over 100 skines before I could find 4 that were close to fitting those wheels. And then I spent about a week grinding and shaping just to get them down to where they were actually working on that. So, I mean, your odds of being able to replace it, you can replace the wheel as long as you have the skines still on the boxing, and yeah, they're not replaceable. Now, when you get into the bolted hubs, the modern ones, these you can replace these anytime you want. They're all built on a certain size, certain standards. They all take a certain size bearing. So yeah, you can those are replaceable. The rest of them, no. You gotta guard them with your life. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us a little bit about the braking system?
Sure. There's about 4 different types of braking. This is very common on a lot of your freight wagons and all your farm type. This basically, we're on the wrong side of it.
Yeah.
There's a lever on this side and what they call a ratchet. And it basically, the ratchet has just got little teeth, and the leather's got the lever locks into them. When you push it forward, so you can lock it, and it'll stay put like a parking brake. Or if you're coming down a hill, you can just set it slightly so you get some friction and help slow down on the hills. But basically, there's a rod that runs all the way to the back, and there's a lever that you can't really see it, but it runs all the way across here. And that brings the bar, when that goes forward, the bar comes back, okay? Very basically simple setup. What's a little hard on them is that's why we have these extra hangers here that spread the weight out. As the wheel's going forward, it wants to push that bar down. So if you don't use good timber to build them, or you let them get a little old and weak, when you hit your brakes, all of a sudden this will just break off. So you got to pay attention to the condition of your brakes. Hitch wagons have what they call a scissor lever. Some of them even have a pedal down in the center, but it has a rod that comes down. Then it has a compound system that kind of goes like this. And as when you pull you apply your pedal, it pushes this out, and it pushes the brake blocks back on the wheels. Bolted hubs, they're modern, they come with a hydraulic brake. And it's a lot more efficient, but it's not very historically correct. Some of the big heavy freight wagons, like the ones that we took from Paso Robles, they actually have a second bar on the back side of the wheel. And they run the extension usually back through about here. And when you do that lever, the lever's quite a bit bigger because you got to have a lot more strength. It basically takes both those brake bars and sandwiches the wheel in, and that helps. Another thing they do with freight wagons, I've got a big heavy blue ore wagon at the house that has it on them, is going down a large mountain, you know, a long downhill thing, gets pretty hard to control with these wagons. So if you're riding your brake the whole time going down the mountain, you will eventually heat up this wheel, this tire. And you can actually heat it up enough to where it'll expand and you lose your tire. So you don't want to do that. And they've got a couple of different ways of getting off a hill without losing your tires. And one of them I don't like, but because it's really hard on the wheel, but they'll have a hook here and a chain, and they'll just run a chain around that tire or wheel and hook it back to the body. So when it rolls forward, it locks up against the spoke and it quits turning. So then it just skids down the mountain. That's awful hard on tires too. And what they do to counteract that problem is they actually put 2 tires on. They shrink this one on, then they turn around and make another one that fits this circumference and shrink it on, so you've got double the metal. And the better way of doing it, they have what they call a skid, and it's a heavy metal boot, and it's shaped. It kind of comes up at the front, and it hangs from the wagon. They can set it down in the dirt. This rolls up onto that boot, and the wheel stops turning. And then you skid down on that boot instead of wearing out your wheels. If you're going uphill and your team peters out on you, a lot of times there's pull-off areas where you can pull over and let your team rest, but not always at a convenient spot. So what they do a lot of times is they'll have 2 big hooks here in the back, and they hang a log from the back. And when they have to stop to let the team rest, they can just drop that log down on the ground, and then they can, roll back against it, and it holds them there until they're ready to go again. You want to tell them about the bells?
During the freighter days, have you ever seen where they've got bells up on the horses' hames, up over their collar? Well, the freighters going up the hills would have a set of bells like on a Hennis Pass or one of the major thoroughfares, so that the ones that were coming down could hear them, and they actually would take and make like bridges that went out over the dam or over the canyon, and the one freighter would have to pull off with his 8 to 10 mules and his big freight wagon so that the ones coming up the hill could keep going. They had the preference, but have you heard the term of "I'll be there with bells on"? Okay, the reason where that came from was that if you have a team of mules or whatever, and you're going up a grade, and your animals just wear out, they can't make it all the way to the top, then basically another teamster with his hitch comes by, he'll go up, park his wagons, unhook his team, come back, hook onto yours, and help you get up to the top of the hill. Well, in order to do that, they would charge you your bells. In other words, you had to give up your bells to get towed to the top of the hill. And it was more than just a matter of pride, like I say, but that's where if you say, well, I got there with my bells on, that meant you were able to pull all the grades. You didn't have to get towed and get embarrassed. Yes, sir.
So going up and down, let's say mountainside, and there's a one-way path.
Yeah.
Down or up, who had the right of way?
The uphill had the right of way always, because it's a hard pull. Going downhill, all you had to do was hold your wagons back, but going uphill was very tough on them. So
So going downhill,
Mhm.
how do you stop the wagon from overrunning your team?
that's where your brake system
So
comes
you're
in.
right,
The other, like I say, the other thing too is when you look at, your Borox, your 20 mule teams, a lot of freight wagons were 16 to 18. The only two animals that could stop the wagon was what were the wheelers, the two in the back. The rest of them didn't even have britching on. So that's why usually you had the biggest animals right on the front of the wagon on the wheel, and they're the only ones capable. So if you had 3 wagons hooked together, that's more than those horses are going to be able to handle. So normally you had a brakeman in each wagon, but if you didn't, well, you had a very tall bar on the brake, and you had ropes running to the front where you could grab those ropes and pull them and lock them. But most of the time before you're starting going down the hill, you either set your shoes or your locks, to get slowed down. Because once you got momentum, you wasn't going to stop it. So, yes, sir.
I see the rear wheels are bigger than the front wheels. Is that normal? Is there a
Yeah, it's almost the rule of thumb. Almost always it's going to be, and the reason for it, there's two actually. The taller your wheel, the easier the draft. In other words, they pull easier. So you want to use as much height as you can. Flip side of that, the taller your wheels, the more top heavy your wagon, the more unstable the wagon can be. The wheels in the front are smaller because if they were that size, you almost wouldn't be able to turn the wagon. Right now with these, this is what they call a 10 to 2 wagon. That's all the turning radius you got. And they have a rub iron here so that wheel doesn't cut into the wood on the wagon. So basically, if you're driving your car, 10 to 2 is about all you can turn in this type, which is even better than what a stagecoach has. A stagecoach has less turning radius than these do. But you can have, so if this had a smaller wheel, it would allow you to turn a little bit sharper. Then they make a type of wagon that they call a cut under that has actually kind of like a notch here. And it allows that wheel to go under the wagon bed quite a bit and improves your turning radius. And these are what is called a reach wagon. If you can see underneath there's a long piece of wood running lengthwise. And that attaches the front frame or gear to the rear gear. You get into delivery wagons like your hitch wagons in town, a lot of your beer wagons, those kind of types. They are what we call a fifth wheel wagon. There is no reach. The gears are actually attached straight to the bed, and they can do a full circle underneath. So, and the reason they use those in the cities is that things are pretty tight. The streets and alleys are really, really kind of narrow. And if they're having to back up to a dock to unload, they've got to be able to maneuver a lot more than this one can. So they can pull their team past where the dock is and actually swing their team out and pull that wagon straight around like that and back into the dock. And when they're doing that, they're blocking the whole road. So then what they have to do is once they dock, they got to turn around and swing that team all the way off to the side again, which you couldn't obviously do with something like this. But with that full motion front end, then it makes it very possible. Yes, sir.
And if you go to a fair event or a rodeo, you could call Budweiser or it's on the internet, and you see their show and they do that. It's pretty spectacular.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it takes quite a bit of talent to do it. Like I say, it's not a real easy thing to do. So, especially if you got 8 of them out there. Huh?
They don't even use the reins. They talk to the horses by name.
Yeah.
They know exactly what they have to do because they've done it 1,000.
It's a combination of both. You are using the reins, but like I say, you are talking to the horses the whole time. That's usually why they'll ask the crowd not to make any noise while they're doing that, because they need to have the horses. And Shellie can tell you, we've got a friend that had about 8 black Percherons, and she borrowed a couple of them on a wagon train, and he had 4 up in front of her, 2 or 3 wagons up. She's driving his horses, and they weren't listening to her, they were listening to him 4 wagons ahead. She had to drop all the way to the back of the wagon.
back where they couldn't hear him. Because he'd click his horses to go and mine would start. They were just so tuned to his
They're used to the
voice.
voice,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yes,
How would you track mileage?
they actually had an odometer. And Shellie found one on the trail once.
Yeah, they were U.S. Army.
There were 2 ways they did it. One is that they actually measured their circumference, and then they had one of the kids walk along and count the revolutions. They sometimes would make it easy on them, and you know how you put your card in the spokes on your bicycle when you're a kid. They did something similar to that, to where they could actually hear it every time it came around, so they weren't having to stare at it all day long. They could count the clicks. But they also made an odometer that would fit alongside, and it would sit there and count, kind of like your bale, your baler counts the bales of hay, it would count the revolutions. And then at the end of the day, they would just do the math. Yes?
Can you talk about the suspension?
This is what we call a dead axle. And that is actually true. There is no springs under this type of a wagon. There can be. They make what they call a bolster spring. And it's a set of 2 springs that saddle over the bolster. So you raise the bed up, you slide those over the top of the bolster. They raise the wagon about 6 inches higher, but it does give you a little bit of a cushion. So that helps. It's about the only help for these wagons other than your seat springs. You've got, there again, I mean, you've got a ton of different designs for springs. I mean, going back to some fancy coaches that would come out with a great big old, what they call a C spring. It was just a big old loop like that. And they'd support it by leather braces coming off of that. It worked off of that motion of that huge spring. You've got side springs that basically are ellipticals, like the seat springs, but they're a lot bigger. That on a normal spring wagon would run this way under the axle. And you'd usually have one on each side on the back axle, one across the front for the front axle. You get into stagecoaches, they had what was called a thorough brace. It's made out of leather straps, and it ran from a cradle from the back axle to the front axle, and the bottom of the coach is on a curve, and it's attached to the thorough braces, but there's nothing to keep it from bouncing this way. But the reason for them was, and it ran kind of like a rocking chair this way. The reason for doing that was that it wasn't for the comfort of the passengers. It was actually for helping the horses. When you hit a rock with this kind of a wagon or with a spring wagon, you hit that rock and it's just a hard jar. And then it goes up and over it. When you hit a rock with a thorough brace like a stagecoach, what happens is that your wheels stop for a second, but the swaying motion of the coach actually lifts it up and over that thing, and it makes it a lot smoother. It takes the jar out. We have a wagon at home that we're in the process of restoring that was used to bring ice from the ice houses to the mines in the Comstock. And it's another one we pulled off Ponderosa. And it was also doubled up as a nitroglycerin wagon. And that's why there was only 3 of them left. The reason it was basically like a stagecoach on steroids. It had 4-inch thorough braces instead of the 3 that a stagecoach would have. But they did that because of the nitroglycerin. They could put it in the base of it had, instead of a coach body, it had a freight box body. But they could put the explosives in the middle, and then they would pack the whole bed full of ice. And that helped keep the nitro under control. And by having the thorough braces, they had less chance of jarring it to make it go off. But that's pretty much all the different, I mean, like I say, I've got a book that thick of all the different types of springs that they experimented with.
This has nothing to do with wagons, but you know that during the Comstock load, when they were hauling ice to the miners, each miner took 90 pounds of ice a day to stay cool. That's how hot and humid it was down in those mine shafts. So they ran back and forth from the ice houses with these big wagons full of ice.
Well, how did that work? 90 pounds of ice, they didn't take it down to the mine, did they?
Yeah, to keep them cool.
Well, I don't know for sure just how they were doing them in the mine themselves, but that's the statistics that they gave us on that. Basically, I think they ran certain shifts and they'd have to come back out and cool off because basically they were dealing with boiling water down there. That's part of the reason why they did Citrus Cut Tunnel and all that. It was a limited amount of time that they could work before they had to come back out and take a break and stuff. And I think that's kind of where the ice came into play more than anything else. Because they couldn't haul enough ice to cool that water off.
I think you've run over your 35 to 45 minutes, Loren.
All righty. Any more questions?
Do they have differentials, or did some of the wagons have differentials?
No, not really. Not like you would in a tractor or in a truck. Basically, they were pretty much all like this. I mean, they had winches. I mean, we had, actually, I give that to Stu. They had winches for logging wagons and different things, but no actual differentials.
Was the barrel for water or what?
You want to tell them?
Originally it was for water. It was for water for you or your animals, but over the years, the barrel's kind of fallen apart. I put my dirty laundry in it when I'm on a wagon train. And then people walk by and pick up the lid and look in and just shut it and walk off. So I've used it as a laundry hamper. I could put a new one on it, but it loses all that character.
Well, I'd say hasn't let me put a new one on there.
Yeah.
So we'll patch it up again.
All right.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate